Earlier this morning, we got the official release of the June Consumer Price Index in the United States, although earlier in the week, a lot of other countries were also reporting their own inflation news. Japan on Monday came out with its wholesale price increase for June. Producer prices rose 0.7% month over month and 9.2% year over year. This is a huge problem for Japan. I spoke about it on my last podcast after the passing of Shinzo Abe. This is the byproduct of Abenomics coming back to bite the Japanese, because after years of trying to get inflation to 2%, they now have inflation well above 2% and no way to rein it back in without precipitating a financial crisis, given the enormity of the debt that they racked up in order to deliberately increase their inflation rate. India also reported 7.01% year-over-year inflation in June. Germany, 7.6% year-over-year, although month-over-month it was just up 0.1%. France was up 0.7% on the month, but their year-over-year inflation rate is just 5.8%. But still, the ECB for years was claiming that the problem in the Eurozone was not enough inflation. Well, now they have a much bigger problem of much too much inflation. And as I said real time, too little inflation was never a problem. It was merely an excuse to create more inflation. And now they've got a much bigger problem than they bargained for. They've got lots of European governments that are now highly in debt because of their reckless monetary policy to create inflation. And now they have no way again of reining it in without unleashing a financial crisis in the Eurozone, which brings me back to the United States and our June CPI number. Well, not only did the June CPI come out hot, it came out red hot. 1.3% was the increase on the month, and the year-over-year increase in CPI came out at 9.1%. Nobody thought we would have a year-over-year increase that high. The range of estimate was 8.5 to 8.8. This is the first time we've had a 9 handle on the CPI. This is the highest increase in consumer prices going all the way back to 1981. Now, of course, if we were honestly measuring prices using the same CPI that we did in 1981, today's number would be something like 18%. I mean, I'm not sure exactly where it would be, but I think a general rule of thumb is whatever the official rate of inflation is, you just double it, and that's the actual rate of inflation. So imagine how the media would be covering inflation if they had to use the real number, instead of pretending it's just 9.1%, because 9.1% is still really bad, except it's a lot worse than 9.1%. One of the obvious ways that it's worse, apart from the fact that we have all the substitution and the stuff that they didn't use back in 1981 to whitewash these numbers, one of the most startling examples of the fraud in the CPI is the shelter component, which again is 1/3 of the CPI. It is the biggest component there, and according to the government, the cost of shelter is up 5.6%. Now, that's still the biggest increase since 1992, and rents apparently, they say, are up 5.78%. That's the biggest increase since 1986, but those numbers pale in comparison to what is actually happening. If you look at any of the official numbers for the year-over-year increase in rents and home prices, it's about 18%. That is what's going on in shelter. Costs are up 18%, but if you're buying a home, costs are up a lot more than 18%, because just because the price of a house is up 18% doesn't mean the cost of owning that house is up 18%, because most Americans don't pay cash for their house. They use a mortgage, and what counts is the monthly payment, not the price of the house, but how much do they have to pay every month once they become a homeowner. And so if you look at the 18% increase in the price, But then you add the new mortgage rate, which a year ago was around 3%, and now it's, I don't know, 5.5, 6. I'm not really sure exactly what it is, but the mortgage rate is much higher. So if you take a look at the average monthly payment today to buy the average home and compare that with what it would have cost a year ago, I bet that monthly payments on a mortgage are up by more than 50% year over year. So in other words, the actual increase in the cost of home ownership is 10 times greater than what the government is claiming.